So here we are in Chicago. It's exciting to see everybody in the Midwest with us. As Hannah mentioned, my name is Casie Clark, and I'm joining you from Whirlpool Corporation with Charlotte Jupp as well from OutThink. And the time is counting down on us. I can see it really clearly here. And also knowing that we're standing between you and the lightning talks, which I'm really excited about, we're going to go ahead and kick things off. So I would like to begin by asking you to do me a simple favor, and hopefully it's one that most of you can relate to. I'd like to ask that you imagine that you're in the market for a new pair of shoes, and you decide that because the event that you need this pair of shoes for is approaching quickly, you would rather shop in person than online to avoid any sort of exchange slowing things down, which is a crazy idea to shop in person, right? Hopefully I've not already lost you. So you go online and you do some quick research and you find the shoe store nearest to you at your local mall. You head into the mall and you're on your way into the store. And as you're approaching, you're surprised to notice that the store that you've chosen to visit, they offer only one style of shoe in just one color, and most concerning, only one size. So how many of you think that you would walk out of the mall on this day in a pair of shoes that fit you well, felt comfortably, and that also are suited to the occasion you're buying them for, which by the way is formal? Okay, so out of the people in this room, like honestly, not even a handful of people raised their hand. I expected more, to be honest, because actually white tennis shoes are fairly versatile. But of the people online, maybe there's another couple of handfuls of folks. The reason for the dilemma that we face here is that we're applying a one-size-fits-all approach to a problem that's inherently personal, right? And so if we expand on that idea just a bit further, we apply it to our organizations, we're not too far off. Unfortunately, just as we wouldn't expect a single pair of white sneakers to meet the needs of every person in this room for a formal event, we can't expect a single security awareness strategy to meet the needs of every organization. And certainly not every department or individual within one, right? Because let's face it, we know it, our organizations are vastly different. The 100-year-old manufacturing company that I work for that builds appliances has a vastly different threat landscape than a nonprofit that's dealing primarily with donor data, or a financial institution that's managing millions, maybe billions of dollars worth of transactions a day, or a cutting edge tech startup that's concerned with highly valuable intellectual property. And so that serves as a reminder that even at the most kind of zoomed out macro level across our industries alone, our organizations have to consider regulatory requirements that we must comply with, critical assets in the environment that vary across industries, and also distinct corporate cultures. And on top of that, we also have very, very unique individuals within our organizations who have different levels of technical understanding. They have different daily routines. And as a result, they have different levels of exposure to potential threats. And so taking all of this paired with an increasingly sophisticated and complex adversary, hopefully it's clear why a generic one-size-fits-all approach is no longer cutting it. Unfortunately, it's oversimplified and it no longer competes with what we're up against, right? In addition to this, to put it simply, it's really disengaging as well for our employees who tune out content that isn't specific to them, because they have so much information coming at them all day long, right? Some organizations don't have required training. Other organizations have a ton of it. And so when we use generic and entirely unspecific statements like use strong passwords or enable MFA, those statements lack enough information to be either useful or actionable for our employees. And so we can't expect that they're going to follow this information that we're giving them. It's also ineffective because when material doesn't resonate, our employees don't retain it. So they're not going to put it to good use later in their day. And lastly, and maybe most concerning, it creates a false sense of security Because when we view security awareness as a purely compliance or check the box type exercise, we're reducing it down to something that's so much less than what it really is. If we don't train, if we don't inform our employees on what matters, how do we expect for them to comply? And so sure, maybe if we're saying things like use strong passwords and enable MFA, we can say that we met a compliance requirement. But have we actually made progress towards building resilience? So I've defined the problem. Hopefully that's clear. Now we need to talk about a solution. If the one-size-fits-all approach is no longer cutting it, then what's the alternative? The answer lies in a security awareness strategy that's tailored to the unique footprint of your organization, leveraging a risk-based approach, which in turn will improve your engagement, it'll improve your retention, it'll improve buy-in, and then it will help you to reduce your risk. And so Charlotte and I have worked together to develop this 5-element framework that you see here on the screen to help you elevate your cybersecurity awareness strategy and also refine and strengthen your approach. And so whether you're developing training, improving your simulated phishing program, or drafting your annual communications plan for the year, you can use this framework to maximize your reach and your impact early on, and also to provide a pathway for growth over time and as you mature. And so the graphic that you see on the screen is intended to visually represent this progression, starting with the broadest factors, which content should be incorporated into your strategy early on. That information is towards the top. And then it funnels down into the more specific and sophisticated elements. So on the right side of the screen, you see the blue arrow identifying that this content is becoming increasingly sophisticated. In addition to that, we've also categorized these into 3 distinct categories, which are must-have, need to have, and really nice to have. Although, of course, there's a disclaimer that compliance requirements always take suit. So I am going to approach this by defining for you each of the individual elements, and then I'm going to hand it over to Charlotte to talk about how to put these individual elements into action. So you're not going to hear me speaking the whole time, fortunately. And Charlotte will also talk about the different KPIs that can be used to measure progress over time as well. So jumping into the first of the 5 elements, we have industry. So we begin by looking outward, considering the most probable and impactful threats within your environment, which in theory should be the most applicable across your audience. So for example, while financial institutions focus on wire fraud and business email compromise, manufacturing might be more focused on targeted ransomware in their operational technology environment. And a healthcare provider might be more focused on patient data privacy and medical device security. And so you begin with your industry because this is going to fundamentally shape your foundational risk landscape. And so for this element, you might consider relying on external industry reports, like the Verizon DBIR, for example, paired with your internal organization's incident response team. They can provide data that's going to help guide you in terms of understanding what your top risks are. And again, this is going to be relevant across your full organization. The second of the 5 elements is your environment, and specifically your organization's unique operating environment. This is focusing primarily on the nature of the work that your audience does and how they complete that work. So for the audience that you're targeting, we want to ensure relevance here. Relevance really, really, really is key, and I can't emphasize that enough. We really should avoid overtraining. We should avoid overloading our employees with information that they don't need to know or that's generic, because when we take that sort of approach, we lose people, they become frustrated, they won't apply their knowledge. So you can determine the real context in this case by asking yourself questions like, where are these folks located? Are they primarily remote? Are they in office? Or do you have a hybrid mix? Is everybody located in a single country, in a single office? Or do you have people dispersed across offices and across locations? Is the nature of their work corporate? Is it manufacturing? Do you have people in the distribution spaces? Or something else entirely? Do they use personal devices or primarily company issued devices? Is your data stored on premise? Is it in the cloud, et cetera? And so these environmental factors introduce unique risk to your environment. And so this is what we need to be training on, right? So for example, training for this first cloud-based team looks significantly different than that of a centralized on-premise location because the way that they do their work is different. And so this is where your program becomes more mature. Next is our policies and processes. And I am a little bit partial here, admittedly, because you'll notice that in my title was governance. But your organization's policies, of course, are at the foundation of the work that you're doing. And so it's really important to recognize that while you operate under specific rules around data handling, password management, and incident reporting, we need to be training our folks on what matters to them. It's probably not the case that every person in your organization needs to be familiar with your disaster recovery plan, right? But if you're training new hires for the very first time, they probably do need to be familiar with your end user security policy. So ask yourself, of the policies we have, or maybe when we consider you have one policy, what's most important for them to know? Start there. If your security awareness training doesn't directly support the policies and the processes that your organization leverages, then we go back to the ineffective piece. You're training people on abstract knowledge rather than actionable behavior. And so your training, to wrap it up, needs to reinforce your actual policies, and it needs to fit seamlessly within your existing processes. So in this case, it's about making sure that your rules are understandable and they're actionable for every employee in your organization. And plus, how else are you going to get everybody's attention and promote these policies if you don't do it through training? And the fourth element is culture. And this is one that's really crucial and sometimes overlooked, but I might argue it's the most impactful in establishing buy-in. When you consider your organization's culture, reflect honestly on the norms and the expectations across your business as it applies to cybersecurity. How is cybersecurity viewed? Is it viewed as a shared responsibility within your organization and do your leaders champion cybersecurity? Or is it seen more as an obstacle? Are people scared to speak up? If employees fear bringing to your attention concerns around a potential incident or suspicious activity in general, then this is a really prime opportunity for you to begin correcting that thinking and beginning the long journey to cultural change. And so an effective program really should help foster a safe environment where reporting is encouraged and not punished. And so I'm going to throw a few buzzwords at you. I recommend that you incorporate your organization's vision and values into your messaging and connect it back to your key imperatives. And help your employees understand how cybersecurity enables the business to progress towards your shared mission. It's almost like this is your marketing opportunity to really begin selling cybersecurity to your folks. And then the last of the elements and the most mature, this is roles. And in this case, we're really beginning to drill down into job responsibilities because we all know that employees in our organization, they all have different responsibilities. As I talked about previously, they all introduce different types of risk. And so the idea here is that you're training based off of those risks specifically. So as we know, C-suite level executives might be a prime target for whaling or business email compromise. Well, a customer services rep, on the other hand, is probably at the forefront of the lines in terms of social engineering. And so once you're prepared to begin addressing cybersecurity threats from a more role-based approach, segment and customize your training to deliver information that's directly relevant to your group of individuals and the specific threats that they encounter. Really magnify your focus, in this case, on these unique individuals. And then what you can do is cycle your way back through the framework. So once I've incorporated all of these concepts into my new hire training and maybe my annual training that takes place every October, now I'm prepared to begin training my HR folks. Now I can go through the same funnel through the lens and considering the employees in my HR organization. I can ask myself all the same questions. And so by focusing on not only your organization's industry, environment, culture, policies, processes, and roles, you can tailor your efforts to ensure that they're highly impactful from the very beginning, and then they can continuously mature over time. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Charlotte to help us understand how to put this into action.
Thank you, Casie. And I hope I'm loud enough. Hello, everyone. So yeah, before I jump into how, and so a bit of an intro to me is I partner with organizations around the world to mature their security awareness training and their frameworks. And so we'll talk about some of the techniques that they've used to hit some of these items in a minute. But before I do that, I just touch on what Wendy was saying in the last presentation, and you could see the B evolve through the years and the program evolve. You're not going to be able to hit all of these points within weeks or maybe even months. It will be a process over a number of years where you look at the data that comes back and your results, and you continually iterate based on what would work for your organization. But so the first point, industry. So Casie mentioned, obviously, different industries, you'll face some of the same risks, but you'll have also specific risks that are being targeted at you. So what content can you use that is specific to your organization? And then even on top of that, how can you tailor that content to make it really relevant and engage your employees? So as an example, if you're a university, you probably don't necessarily refer to yourself as an organization. You're a university or a community or a school. And so making sure you use language that really engages your employees and make it feel that it's targeted at them and it's suitable for them, and you haven't just got something generic and rolled out, it will drive the importance and the engagement. So as an example here, so we were partnering with a media company in Europe who were getting about a 40% completion rate in their annual training. Obviously, that's probably quite low and you'd want to get higher up, but even the CEO of that organization said, why are we bothering to do this? What is the point? It was a bit ruder that he put it than that, but I won't repeat the swear words. And so what we did with that organization is we focused on content that was specific for media, so protecting sensitive data, in their case, intellectual property, the stories that they're writing, and really kind of taking that sensitive data story and transferring it to something that would really resonate for them. Also social media training. And by doing so, within kind of the first year of that program, we were able to increase completion rates from 40% to 80%. So we still want to drive those higher if we can, but we're hoping that the word of mouth and that now that the 1 year has gone through the program, that the next year they come to do this, there'll be further engagement still as people really understand how this is beneficial for them. So the next point would be environment. So as Casie was mentioning, not all of your employees would be desk-based necessarily. You might have kind of factory employees. You could work in retail and have people on the shop floor. In education, you might have bus drivers. And so how do you talk to all these different people? Desk-based training might not be the only answer. Can you train people through consoles on shop floors? Can you do training, for example, in a classroom-based scenario? Also think about the language you use. So if you're a global organization, if you really want to engage people, it's probably best if they can learn the same content as their peers, but in their native language. So if you can train in Spanish or German or French, as well as English. And then start thinking about what topics you would teach some of your audience. So it could be that you look at physical security topics instead of ones that target people being online all the time. Or it could be that you start thinking about how you could offer them content that would benefit them in their personal lives. So we've seen this to be really impactful, that if you can train someone about how to use MFA on their online banking account, they immediately think, oh yes, I've heard stories about this in the news about how people are losing all their money, and yes, I can see how this is relevant for me. And obviously subconsciously, the things that you're teaching will transfer into a business environment as well. And that drives up the engagement, and we've actually had some of our best feedback from audiences that have never had the opportunity to be trained before, and they feel like, yes, this is great, I'm taking huge value from this. As an example here, working with a Canadian company, an industrial services organization, their technicians were always out in the field talking to clients. And they were finding that the MFA process that they had in place in that organization, so to enable the people in the field to log in and produce quotes while they're doing that sales cycle,
was not that easy when you were remote, and it was slowing down and losing the momentum. So by discovering this, by actually training these people for the first time and getting some feedback about these processes and policies that they had in place, the organization was actually able to adapt their MFA policy for the people in the field. They were able to understand that these folks had different risks and that they could actually adapt the policy, and it would mean that quoting and the sales cycle could be sped up as a result, which was seen as a business win, not necessarily a cyber win, but it was a cyber win. You were building that trust and engagement with your employees, but the business as well was great because you were kind of speeding up that sales cycle. The next point, your policies. So obviously, what are your policies? If you have the number of characters you have in your password policy, make sure you state that within your training. If you use LastPass as your password manager, call out the product name within your training, because we might work in security every day and know that LastPass would be a password manager, but people who don't, and they don't necessarily see that. Also, think about how you can communicate who to contact in the event of a threat. Put the email address within the training, call out the specific team name, don't just, or even the person's name in some instances. Don't necessarily just put generic IT team if that's not who should be contacted. Think about how to train people. So if you're using LMS for health and safety training, consider using your LMS for your cybersecurity training, your awareness training, because people will know where to find content. Also, if you can move from a once-a-year training approach to a training perhaps that you roll out over every quarter, we've seen that this will increase engagement because you're not just doing one long drop if you can make it into bite-sized chunks. And it will also help retain the knowledge across your community, because you're constantly bringing that cybersecurity conversation to the forefront of people's minds. So we deployed this approach at a bank in the UK, and they moved from having yearly training to quarterly training, and they actually found that they could cover more content in less time because engagement was higher and knowledge scores remained higher as well. So that was a big win again for the security team, but also for the business, because I'm sure you've all heard from your business leaders, can we spend less time training this year? And they demonstrated that they could, but they could also cover more content and get stronger results. And then finally, think outside of perhaps more formal training into maybe a cyber champions program. So how can you take the most engaged and excited people in your organization who have strong knowledge about security, and maybe use that network of peers across different departments to help promote a great cyber policy, great cyber culture within the different teams. These people might be more approachable than your cybersecurity team. People might not mind going up to their peers and asking a question about cyber that they don't know, or engaging in conversation. And you can start to uncover threats and risks and have cybersecurity as a business as usual conversation. So culture, so this is perhaps a trickier one, but as Casie said, how can we understand what our wider organization, our colleagues feel about cyber? So while you're doing that training, you've got the opportunity, you've got the engagement and the attention of your audience. Ask them what they think. Are they confident in what they're learning? And do the knowledge scores match with that confidence levels? Or perhaps are they overconfident? Do they intend to comply with the policies that you're rolling out? It's surprising perhaps how many people will actively tell you that they don't. And therefore you can start to understand the risks that sit with that. You might not be able to change your policies as a result, but you can see where perhaps people won't be following them. And also, are the cyber policies going to impact someone's productivity? Again, you don't necessarily change your policy, but if you understand that when push comes to shove and people are under pressure, they're going to think about their business goals and not necessarily cyber policies. So again, what are the risks that sit with that? And an example here, we had a charity who managed to, they were using a data encryption tool which they were meant to use to send client data over to the client. But they found that the tool wasn't fit for purpose because the client couldn't decrypt the data. And through the training and through asking people, they found out that no one was bothering to use this tool, so they changed it as a result. And finally, roles. So again, content specific based on the risks that you face. Someone with privileged access might have different risks than people who have access to finance data or to HR data. So make sure you tailor your content specific to that. But also your core content. So if you're a healthcare organization, you need to
train on HIPAA, for example. The different roles and different people in the team need to perhaps understand the risks associated to them and their role in relation to that data. So for example, a CXO might need to understand about the regulations and the risks and the legal requirements. The HR team about how to access data and the confidentiality. And developers around data encryption and how secure coding practices. So this is great if you can tailor the examples in core training to really hit home to the people in their particular roles, so they understand the relevance to them, and that will drive up the engagement and knowledge. So by doing this, you start to see real behavior change across your organization, and you can look at some, I guess, key tangible outcomes of that, and I'll kind of whiz through these in a second. But to do so, you also need to think about KPIs that you can track your progress that aren't just the typical click and completion rates, which won't be able to tell you much of the story. So first, leadership buy-in. So we mentioned before about driving efficiency in the training process, spending less time whilst having high results. This will help you get buy-in from across your leadership team, across the business. And we see that where line managers are engaged, the data heavily shows that if you get line managers engaged in cybersecurity, the teams will follow. So track how engaged your line managers are, and then what the ratio is down to their line managees. Cyber champions, we've mentioned this before. How can you get that network of peers to drive the culture across the organization for you? Look for people who are knowledgeable and engaged and want to be part of the process. And you will see this will increase proactive security conversations with respect to business goals and proactive flagging of risks. So risk reduction, you'll start to see changes in behaviors across your colleagues. Safer web browsing, for example, you'll be able to see fewer data loss events, more reporting of threats. And you can start to understand where risks still exist and highest risk. How can you use technology to further secure and perhaps conditional access policies, for example, you can tighten those for the employees who perhaps are more susceptible and need more help. And so you can reduce the risk to your organization through the picking up with technology. You can influence strategy. You've got way more data than you had before. So how can you use that data to feed the wider cybersecurity conversations? So you'll be able to see what policies people intend to comply with versus not. And therefore you can perhaps influence spending conversations and see which tools would be best used to minimize the risk further. So you can track kind of how much your data is being used in cyber risk assessments. So increasing productivity and profitability. So we've seen across the data that we look at that the organizations who can engage their colleagues the most and who can kind of improve the efficiency of their training process are actually year on year over 5 years, 32% more profitable than those that don't. Now, I'm not claiming that's all down to their cybersecurity awareness training, but contributing factors there are business efficiency and less time lost to incidents and less money spent on obviously recovering from those incidents. And again, employee buy-in. If you can make your employees feel heard and that they're part of the process, they will comply more with what you're teaching and think more about cybersecurity. So if they feel that you're acknowledging where they're telling you you're making their life difficult, then it becomes more of a kind of a collaborative process. And actually, data shows that 27% of people with privileged access don't intend to comply with all the policies that are out there. That's like 27% of privileged access users. But in organizations where that collaboration takes place, this drops to just 6%. So obviously kind of reducing a huge amount of risk there. And finally, behavioral change. So you move from just being checkbox for compliance to actually seeing people behaving more securely across your organization. Risks reduce, and where risks still exist, you can have a really targeted approach about how you can use automation and technology and adaptive security to further minimize those risks for you, and ultimately do what we're all hoping to achieve in reducing the number of human-initiated cybersecurity incidents.
So reflecting now on what we've shared, we've tried to wrap this up and put a bow on top by developing a few key takeaways and maybe a little bit of validation for everybody in the room too. Maturing your program, of course, is a journey. It takes time. It doesn't happen in a few weeks, doesn't happen in a year. It takes an iterative process where you try things, you see what works, and then you try again, right? We fail fast. But context is really key. And this is one of the points that I really try to drive in our organization. It's important that we understand the folks that we're looking to connect with. Because if we don't form that connection, then it's really hard for them to retain information. If it's not relevant to them, it's going to go in one ear and out the other. They're not going to remember it. They're not going to apply it. And so by really working to understand our organization's unique footprint and the 5 elements that we chatted about, we can develop content that our employees will remember to help reduce their risk. It's also really important that we measure what matters. And so Charlotte spoke about how we need to move beyond simple compliance and leverage KPIs that truly measure behavior change. And so by developing those key metrics, we can keep an eye on the progress that we're making, which helps us to mature and iterate over time to become better, of course. And then lastly, the path is challenging. It can be really grueling sometimes. We all know that, but the outcome is really powerful. And if we do it right, then we can influence security decisions at the highest levels of our organizations related to people, processes, strategy, technology, the way the money's spent. And once we're able to do that, we can really empower our employees to reduce human risk.
Thank you. So with our final slide, as we see, like one size fits all approach is no longer adequate, and you need to make sure that each employee has their own pair of shoes so that they can comfortably walk towards understanding and helping their organization in becoming more cyber resilient. So thank you very much.